Triumphant return 40 years later.
Yeah, tonight we learn more about the history of this famous speedster. And it's a story that's positively upstate.
Look who saved Slider Sunday again!
Here we go. Perfect King's Hawaiian slider.
Tastes good too. King's Hawaiian Slider Sunday.
The only way to Sunday.
The following segment is sponsored by Crossroads Ford.
In tonight's Positively Upstate, she was one of the most famous racing boats in the world, bombing across the waters at speeds of 80 miles per hour. Now, more than 40 years later, KAAMA is back and better than ever. CBS 6's Julia Dunn climbs aboard and has more on its connection to a Capital Region legend.
Anyone familiar with offshore powerboat racing knows of the legendary Betty Cook from Glens Falls. In a sport dominated by men, she was a force to be reckoned with, and in the late 1970s was behind the wheel of this 38-foot scarab named KAAMA.
And here she comes, America's hardest driving grandmother, Betty Cook, queen of the tracks.
Betty Cook was a grandma, 56-year-old grandma. At that point, offshore racing was babes, bikinis, and a lot of alcohol, and she came along, a grandma came along and started winning the sport.
Tom Jewsbury and his wife Libby are behind the restoration of KAAMA, which Tom bought 15 years ago.
I was kind of looking for another boat.
It had been stripped to the hull, a shadow of its former self. Now, she is definitely back to life, and Jason Saris and his team at Performance Marine in Bolton Landing made it all happen. He had actually met Betty Cook when he started offshore racing in Florida back in the 80s.
Back then, they raced 200 miles in the open ocean. And for anybody to be able to do it, you had to be pretty tough. And, you know, 3 national championships, 1 world championship, she obviously was. Come on up.
For a boat that's so extra, the inside of KAAMA is very simple. Basically, it's engine and instruments. There aren't even seats. You stand the entire time you're racing, which is done by 2 people, one steering, the other operating the throttle, which Sarah says is crucial, especially when you're airborne.
When you go off a big wave and it comes out of the water, you have to pull back on the throttles because it's like shifting into neutral all of a sudden, and the motors would over-rev and get damaged. And then, of course, when you're back in the water, you got to be right back on the throttles.
I think I can drive this. Would you trust me?
I would.
I wouldn't. Here's KAAMA this summer at a New York City poker run.
We got out there for the first time with other boats and went fast and saw what the boat could do.
What a fun way to enjoy the result of all their hard work. And for Saris, honoring the memory of Betty Cook.
You know, I looked up to her when I was young working on it. She was, you know, she was the man. And, you know, to be able to do that, that's awesome. What a thrill.
In Bolton Landing, Julia Dunn, CBS 6 News.
What a great story, and she must have been a real inspiration to other young women who also are now behind the wheel of fast boats as a result.